The security tycoon slid the man's parole papers across the counter and let the whole shop read them aloud. "Once a thief, always a thief," he announced, loud enough for the waiting customers to turn. The young apprentice didn't flinch. He just kept filing the brass key in his hand, calm and quiet. What nobody in that little locksmith shop knew, not the tycoon, not the customers, not even the old owner watching from the back, was that within 72 hours, this exact criminal would be the only person on earth standing between a trapped family and disaster. The papers on the counter told the story of who he used to be. They said nothing about who he'd become. And by the end of that week, the man reading them out loud would owe him something no apology could ever cover. His name was Dorian, and he was 31 years old. 6 of those years he'd spent behind a locked door he couldn't open. A fitting punishment, he sometimes thought, for a man who'd once opened doors that weren't his. As a teenager, he'd learned to pick locks the wrong way, slipping into dark houses while families slept, taking what wasn't his. One night a job went bad. A child woke up crying, and Dorian ran into the yard and simply stopped. He knelt in the wet grass and wept. He turned himself in the next morning. Prison gave him time to think, and a chaplain gave him a used book on the history of locks. He read it 40 times. He came out wanting to protect the very doors he used to violate. The old owner of Hollis Locks was named Walt, a stooped man with kind eyes who hired people no one else would. "Everybody deserves a locked door they can trust," Walt liked to say, "and everybody deserves a second key." He took one look at Dorian's record and hired him anyway. For 2 years, Dorian swept floors, cut keys, and studied every mechanism Walt could teach him. He was gifted, unnervingly so. He could feel the pins of a lock the way a musician feels strings. Customers loved him without knowing his past. Walt watched him grow and told him quietly one evening, "The past is just the door you came through, son. It isn't the room you have to stay in." Dorian held on to that sentence like a lifeline. Then Marcus Vane walked in. Vane owned the biggest security company in the county. Sleek trucks, glossy ads, a smile like a locked gate. He'd come to buy out small shops like Walt's and swallow their contracts. He recognized Dorian's face from an old news clip and couldn't resist. "You let a burglar cut people's keys," he sneered at Walt. "That's who guards this town now? Criminals?" He laughed, sharp and short. "I'll make sure every client knows exactly who works here." Dorian said nothing. He simply set down the key, met Vane's eyes, and answered softly, "I know locks, because I once did wrong by them. Now I spend my life making them right." Vane scoffed and strode out. But the whole town, it turned out, was listening. What Vane didn't know was that Walt's shop held the master records for half the historic homes in the district. Old, complex mechanisms that Vane's flashy digital systems couldn't touch. And one of those homes belonged to the Ellery family, in the hills above town. The Ellerys had recently signed with Vane's company, seduced by his glossy pitch. He'd installed a modern electronic vault door on their new panic room, a steel-walled safe space for their 2 young children. Impenetrable, Vane had promised them. "Nothing gets in, and nothing gets out unless I say so." He'd meant it as a selling point. He had no idea those very words would become a nightmare, because a system that keeps everyone out can also, when it fails, keep everyone in. And systems fail. It happened on a Thursday night, in the middle of a bad electrical storm. Lightning struck the transformer feeding the Ellery house. The power surged, then died, and Vane's electronic panic room door, the one with no mechanical override, locked itself solid. Inside were the 2 Ellery children, ages 6 and 9, who'd been playing in the reinforced room. Outside, their parents pounded on cold steel while a small electrical fire smoldered in the wall behind the failed panel. The backup battery was dead. The keypad was black. The manufacturer's hotline played hold music, and the impenetrable room was slowly filling with the faint, terrifying smell of smoke. The parents dialed everyone. Fire crews arrived and stared at the seamless steel door, helpless. It had no keyhole. It had no seam. It had no mercy. Someone remembered Walt's shop. The old-timers who could open anything. Walt was too frail now to make the climb, and his hands trembled with age. So he called Dorian at midnight. "They need a lock open," Walt said, his voice breaking. "It's children's, son, and it's Vane's door." Dorian was already pulling on his coat. He drove up the flooded mountain road with his kit on the seat beside him. When he arrived, drenched and quiet, a firefighter tried to wave him off, until Walt's name and the words, "He's the best there is," moved the crowd aside. And there in the driveway, soaked and furious and utterly powerless, stood Marcus Vane. His own installation had failed. His own hands couldn't fix it. Vane saw Dorian step out of the truck and something cracked in his face. "You?" he spat. "You're not touching my system. I don't need a thief." Dorian walked past him without a word and knelt by the sealed door. He pressed his ear to the steel and heard, faint and muffled, a child crying on the other side. Something in him went very still. "Hey," he called through the metal, gentle as a lullaby. "I'm here. I open doors now. That's my whole job. You just hold on for me. Okay?" A small voice answered yes. Dorian opened his kit. Behind him, Vane kept shouting about liability and lawsuits, but the firefighters had already turned their backs on him. They were watching the quiet man work. Here is the thing about locks that Dorian understood and Vane never had. A lock is not a wall. A lock is a puzzle designed by a person, and every puzzle a person builds, another person can solve. Vane sold the illusion that a door could be perfect. Dorian knew the truth, that every mechanism has a logic, a weakness, a way in for someone patient enough to listen. He'd spent his youth abusing that truth. Now he bent over the dead electronic housing, stripped the panel, and found the manual solenoid the manufacturer had buried and hidden. The failsafe Vane had never even read about. His hands, once used for theft, moved with the care of a surgeon. Minutes stretched. The smoke thickened. And then, softly, something inside the door clicked. The steel door swung open. Smoke rolled out, and with it came two coughing, terrified children, straight into their parents' arms. The mother collapsed to her knees, sobbing. The father grabbed Dorian and couldn't speak. Firefighters rushed in and killed the smoldering fire in seconds. The whole driveway seemed to exhale at once. Dorian just stepped back into the rain, quiet as ever, and let the family have their moment. He didn't look for thanks. He'd learned long ago that doing right isn't a performance. It's a debt you pay to the person you used to be. He wiped the rain from his eyes and began calmly to pack his tools. Behind him, for the first time all night, Marcus Vane had gone completely silent. The next morning the story was everywhere. The local paper ran it under a simple headline: "Ex-offender saves 2 children from failed bulletproof vault." Every detail came out, including whose system had trapped them and whose so-called criminal had gotten them out. Vane's phone rang all day with clients canceling contracts. But the twist wasn't the collapse of Vane's business. The twist was what Dorian did next. He drove to Vane's office, walked past the stunned receptionist, and set a folder on the desk. Inside were detailed notes on the exact flaw in the panic room design, the missing mechanical override, with clear instructions on how to fix every unit Vane had already installed across the county. Your other clients, Dorian said quietly, have children too. Vane stared at the folder, then at the man he'd humiliated in front of a shop full of people. Why? He finally managed. After what I said about you, why help me? Dorian's answer was steady and slow. Because someone gave me a second key, when I didn't deserve one. Walt did. So did that chaplain. So did the judge who believed I could change. He paused at the door. You can spend your life reading a man's worst chapter out loud, or you can help him write a better one. I know which one saved me. And then he left. Vane sat alone a long time. The next week he recalled every dangerous unit and rebuilt them for free, and he hired 2 people fresh out of prison to help him do it. There's a real lesson buried in all of this, one worth sitting with. We love to believe that people are fixed, that a thief is only ever a thief, that a mistake is a permanent address. But Dorian's whole life proved the opposite. The same skill that once did harm, aimed in a new direction, saved 2 children's lives. He wasn't valuable despite his past. He was valuable in that exact moment, partly because of it, because he'd learned locks from the inside out. Redemption isn't pretending the wrong never happened. It's letting the wrong become the very thing that teaches you to do right. Marcus Vane learned that a man's record tells you where he's been. It never, ever tells you what he's capable of becoming when someone finally hands him a chance. Dorian eventually became a partner at Hollis Locks. And when old Walt retired, he ran the shop the same way, hiring the people no one else would, keeping the door open for the ones the world had locked out. He never forgot the night he knelt in the rain and heard a child crying behind cold steel, and how the worst thing he'd ever done became part of the best thing he'd ever do. If this story moved you, if you believe people can change when someone finally gives them the chance, then take a second right now and subscribe to Quiet Justice. Every week we bring you stories of the overlooked, the underestimated, and the redeemed. Quiet people who prove that dignity always finds its way home. Hit that subscribe button and stay for the next one. You won't want to miss who rises next.